Let's go right to the phones. Let's go to America's expert on worldview ballooning, our good friend Tim Sandefur, VP of Litigation at Goldwater. Tim, welcome back.
Hey, Chris. Thanks for having me back.
I missed you so much that I told Jen I got to get him on before the worldview trial. So this is why you're here. So what happened to Prop 208 in the courts recently? That's why we have you on today. Explain to the folks.
Yes, so the Superior Court, the trial court, declared that Proposition 208 is invalid, and that's the massive income tax increase that was adopted by voters in 2020, I guess November 2020 at this point. And the Supreme Court took up this case last summer and said, look, this Prop 208 has this big problem because the money that this tax is going to gather cannot be legally spent because the state constitution has a limit on how much government can spend, and this violates that limit. So the court said if that's true, if you do the math and that comes out that way, then that means Prop 208 is just unconstitutional. And then the court sent it back to the trial judge to do that math. And what the judge decided last week was Prop 208 is unconstitutional because the spending that it requires exceeds the limits in the state constitution. And this is so silly that this whole thing even came up because obviously you can't just ignore the state constitution, and yet that's what the Invest in Ed folks decided to do. Hold
on, you just set me up for a great stand-up joke. The state universities ignore the state constitution all the time.
Well, unfortunately, bureaucrats all across the state like to ignore the Constitution because, frankly, few of them care much about what the legal limits on their powers are because they're more concerned with, showing up in the newspapers and beating their chests about creating jobs and all these sorts of things. And what the actual limits on their authority are often don't matter. And, being a progressive means never having to worry about what the Constitution actually allows or doesn't allow. And so progressive forces who want to take more money from our paychecks every day decided to run an initiative to impose a job-killing, crushing tax on any person in Arizona who they called the rich. And by the rich, they meant anybody making $250,000 a year or more. But the initiative did not differentiate between business income and personal income. So that meant this tax fell heaviest on Arizona's small business owners, who are the leading generator of jobs and wealth creation in this state. So
because it was based on gross income basically of a business. Right. So 200,000 gross income for a business ain't much, kids.
And so it's a very fortunate thing that the court struck it down because really, is there anything more economically foolhardy than raising taxes in the midst of an unprecedented recession with the COVID pandemic and rising inflation? We're going to put a huge California-style tax on businesses in this state. What a terrible idea to try and Californiaize the economy of Arizona. And it's a fortunate thing that the court said no.
So I remember with this, there was also some hubbub with the people that were collecting the signatures, this Arizona Petition Partners, LLC. They were charged with 50 misdemeanor counts in a connection with alleged payments. I mean, it felt weird from the beginning, this thing.
Well, there have been lots of problems with this initiative. You remember, in addition to all these other things, about 2 years ago, the supporters tried to put it on the ballot, and the court said you can't put it on the ballot because it's misleading. They had calculated the taxes that they said it would impose in a way that would have misled voters and made them think that the taxes were lower than they actually were. So they had to go back to the drawing board. And the second time around, they wrote the initiative in such a way, they actually put, I'm not making this up, they put into the initiative, this is exempt from the state constitution. That's basically what they said. So because the state constitution has this formula for spending that, by the way, was put into the Constitution by voters through a ballot initiative. So you're talking about respecting the will of the voters. You got to respect this. And it says there's a formula for spending to make sure that Arizona doesn't fall into California-style red ink. And so we put that in the Constitution. And then the Invest in Ed Prop 208 people come along with an initiative that does not amend the Constitution, does not add anything new to the Constitution. It's just an ordinary law. But they put in there, by the way, these revenues should not count under the formula in the state constitution. Well, I'm sorry, you can't do that. You can't just write yourself an exemption from the state's fundamental law. But this is how progressives think. Their primary concern is taking more wealth away from those who have earned it and giving them to bureaucrats who are charged with the authority of shaping our society to suit their needs.
Again, so when you have the gall to put something in a prop that says this ignores the Arizona state constitution, right? This goes back to something I think you and I have talked about, and I've talked about this with legislators before, is the proposition process, Tim Sandefur, is so messed up, right? You can write these sloppy things, say what you want, have illegal petition gathering programs, and then we have to adjudicate it a year and a half later after all this headache.
It's even worse than that, Chris, because there's the so-called Voter Protection Act in the Arizona Constitution that makes it virtually impossible to repeal or to amend an initiative once it's passed. So that means that even if an initiative contains a glaring mistake that nobody intended, even the supporters say, yeah, that was a mistake, we didn't mean that, you almost can never fix that initiative by the legislature's hands are tied, and you have to have a second initiative in order to go back and change that. So as a result, if an initiative is passed that, let's say 1970 or something, and fashions and needs and things change, the economy changes and everything, you can't undo it because it's the Voter Protection Act. Now, this is a real concern when you're talking about repealing things, because not only does that lock-in work for initiatives that are passed, it also might make it impossible to undo a repeal. What does that mean? Nobody knows. Lawyers argue about it. It's never. So the initiative process in Arizona is seriously problematic. It's got a lot of legal problems with it, and that opens the door to progressives who want to come in and use the ballot box to take wealth away from those who earned it and give it to those who have not.
So this was introduced by an Oregon-based organization called Stand for Children, LLC, originally. And you can just tell, it's just
that's right,
because there's a low threshold for petitions in Arizona compared to others. Is that a true statement?
That's right, and so that makes Arizona a place that if you're you're a progressive wealth redistributor, Arizona is kind of your first target, because if it gets past there, then you can go on to the next state and try and get your fantastic new bureaucratic idea adopted in other states. So unfortunately, Arizona's threshold for adopting initiatives is very low, and our threshold for changing or fixing broken initiatives is very high.
How can we make it better? If you had the Tim Sandefur, magic wand of how to make the before we get to this point, how does that look better? Or what are other states doing better than us?
Well, Arizona is the only one that has that one-way ratchet Voter Protection Act that way. California has one that's almost as bad, and of course, look at the situation California is in. So you'd have to amend the Constitution to fix that problem. But I tell you, just one thing alone would help fix that, which is to tell people about this. I don't think people even are aware of the fact that when it comes to voter initiatives in Arizona, it's basically one vote, one time, and that thing is stuck in there forever. So just letting people know about that, I think, would fix much of the problem.
The undoing the Voter Protection Act, that would have to be done by another proposition?
Yeah, it'd have to be done by amending the state constitution.
Gotcha. All right. Well, so is there any more possibilities that this can get appealed or anything else, or is 208 dead?
It is possible. The progressive forces could decide to try and litigate this back to the Supreme Court. Honestly, between you and me, I don't think they will, because I don't think they have any chance of prevailing. The court was as clear as it could possibly be, but we're happy to see them in court again if that's the route they'd like to take.
What do you think of the current makeup of the Supreme Court? Everyone said that Kavanaugh and Amy Comey were going to be this, originalist kind of folks. What are we seeing in some of their decisions since they got on there? On the federal Supreme Court, I think it's still a little too early to tell about Barrett. With Kavanaugh, he's a moderate conservative, sort of your George W. Bush type. And, so that means he's pretty good on some things. And, I wish he would be a little bit stronger on some other things. I think my favorite justice on the U.S. Supreme Court today is Neil Gorsuch. I think Justice Gorsuch is really a fantastic legal mind. His opinions are always really well written, really persuasive and interesting. And I particularly love it when he disagrees with Justice Clarence Thomas, because the two of them are so smart and write so well that it's always a real
interesting argument to hear both sides of when they disagree on that thing.
When it came to the VAx Mandate decision, was there anything you were surprised about during that decision?
Not particularly. That case was really more about the power of administrative agencies than about up and down on vax mandates or masks or anything like that. And the power of administrative agencies, this is one reason why I like Justice Gorsuch so much, is because the power of these bureaucratic, unelected administrative agencies to just change the rules, to dictate the law to the rest of us when the people who run those agencies are not accountable to voters, that's a real threat to our constitutional system. And Justice Gorsuch takes that very seriously. It's basically the reason he was put on the Supreme Court is that he's concerned about that. And so I really look forward to seeing more decisions that limit the power of what we call the administrative state.
Absolutely. Amen. So before we let you go, today is Dee Snider's birthday from Twisted Sister. So we always want to celebrate music birthdays. And I think, Tim, the next time you get up for a Goldwater, fundraising dinner, right? Baseball players have their walk-up music as they go to the.
I do need walk-up music. That's true.
So I think now I'm going to say goodbye to you. Thanks for everything that you do. We'll talk about after Worldview, and if you get a streaming link for Worldview, send it my way. Okay, because I would love that. But because it's Dee Snider's birthday, I think this is going to be your walk-up music for your next one. It's "We're Not Going to Take It" by Twisted Sister. So.
All right. Thanks, Chris. That's great.
Later, buddy. Wake up, Tucson, 10:30 The Voice.